Hey everyone, welcome back to Bible Bits. Today we are still in Genesis 17 and we're going to finish out the chapter. A little bit of a long reading, so bear with me. We're starting in verse 15 here and we'll go down. And God said to Abraham, "As for Sarai your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and moreover I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall become nations. Kings of peoples shall come from her." Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed, and said to himself, "Shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child?" And Abraham said to God, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before you." God said, "No, but Sarah your wife shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his offspring after him. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I have blessed him, and will make him fruitful, and multiply him greatly. He shall father 12 princes, and I will make him into a great nation. But I will establish my covenant with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear to you at this time next year." When he had finished talking with God, God went up from Abraham. Then Abraham took Ishmael his son, and all those born in his house or bought with his money, every male among the men of Abram's house, and he circumcised the flesh of their foreskins that very day, as God had said to him. Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, and Ishmael his son was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. That very day Abraham and his son Ishmael were circumcised, and all the men of the house, those born in the house, and those bought with money from a foreigner who were circumcised with him. There's a few things we could go over in this longer section, but the one that I really want to linger on here is, did you notice what Abraham did again? We've talked about it before in previous weeks. We've talked about it where we kind of try to insert our own plan in. We say, "God, we know what your plan is, but let me go ahead and get a head start on this." Sarah did it when she gave Hagar to Abraham to try to kick-start this whole promise thing. And notice how Abraham here even says, how about Ishmael? I'm old. I'm 100. Sarah's 90. I don't see how this is going to happen. What about Ishmael? Why don't you take Ishmael, make him the promised son, and then we'll all just go home from here, How many times do we do things like that in our own lives? "God, I know what your plan is, but it doesn't seem possible. I don't see how it's going to happen. So why don't you just make this work right here? I don't see how I'm going to be able to achieve this thing that I feel you've called me to do. So why don't I just settle for this? Why doesn't this just fill the void?" The earth is full of people who have settled for Ishmael. Now, Ishmael is not the problem. Ishmael's not a bad guy in terms of, he didn't do anything wrong. Ishmael was just born. It's not his fault. Ishmael was, as far as we can tell, a somewhat prominent figure in his age. The problem with Ishmael is not Ishmael himself. The problem with Ishmael is that Isaac is the promised one. And Abraham wanted to settle for Ishmael. He wanted to settle for second. He wanted to say, "You know what? I don't see how I'm going to get better, so let me just take what's here." The earth is full of people who have settled for Ishmael. And I don't mean that in terms of human beings. I mean that in terms of our lives, where we know that God has a plan for us. We know he has something he wants us to do, but we settle for whatever is in front of us at the moment. Why? Because it just doesn't seem possible. It doesn't seem like it's possible that God's going to actually do what he said he wants to do with me. So let me just settle with what I have right here. I don't necessarily know that I'm ever going to be able to go out and reach someone, in the Middle East or in Africa. So instead, I'm going to settle with my job right here. I don't know that I'm going to ever be a business leader as I feel called to be. So instead, I'm just going to settle with this little job I have over here. I'm happy with that. Now, there is truth to the fact that we should work where we are until God calls us up out of it. But when we are faced with the choice, when we are given by God this opportunity, when God says to us, "Hey, I have an Isaac for you," and we say, "But what about Ishmael?" What are we really doing? We're really saying, "God, I'm not sure I trust you to actually bring me where you've promised me that I'll go." That's what Abraham's hinting at. You heard him say it. Look, I'm 100 years old. Sarah's 90 years old. These kinds of things don't happen, God. We don't have kids at this age. So how about we just settle with what we have? What we have is safe. What we have is already here. We can't fail with what we already have. How often do we do that in our own lives? We take what is safe, what's here, what doesn't require anything more of us, what seems possible. and we settle for it, even though God has something greater. Today, with this short video, I just want to encourage you to look at your life and ask yourself, am I chasing the promise of God, or am I just settling for Ishmael? I don't know what your promise is. To some people, God's promise is to be a loving husband or a loving wife and to build a family right here in Stafford, Kansas, and that is His promise. Fantastic. For some people, that promise might be to be a business leader in the city, wherever that is, and to lead up a next generation of business leaders for God. Fantastic. Maybe your gift or your calling from God is to go out and preach the word somewhere. Maybe in America, maybe not in America. What I want to challenge you today is don't settle for Ishmael. Don't look at the promise and say to yourself, well, I don't see how that's going to happen, so I'm just going to take second best. I'm just going to take what's been placed right here in front of me. The thing I built with my own hands, the thing that's worked so far, the thing that's right here, I'm going to use that. Instead, keep going after God's promise. Abraham seems to have doubted again. But did you notice what the end of the story goes with? He gets up after God leaves, and everyone in the house is circumcised. He gets up and he follows God. He gets up and he goes after the promise. Yeah, he doubted. Yeah, he tried to insert Ishmael right there. He said, hey, take Ishmael. But when it came down to it, he got back up and followed. And that's what I want to encourage you with. Get back up and follow. Don't settle for Ishmael if God has promised you Isaac. And I want to make this very clear because oftentimes you hear words like this put in the mouths of prosperity gospel type stuff. We're not talking about wealth. We're not talking about power. Maybe those are parts of what God has promised you. But the world is more than money, and the world is more than power. There are souls out there. There's happiness. There's joy. There's a life God has called us all to live, each one of us in our own place. Some of us are called to be the king. Some of us are called to be the farmer. If we're in our spot, if we're where God has called us to be, we will be happy. And sometimes Ishmael is not, I was called to be a business leader and instead I choose to work a minimum wage job. Sometimes Ishmael is, I was called to live a quiet life on a farm, but I've decided to go chase money in New York City. Sometimes Ishmael is seductive. He looks very, very good. He looks like something that will make you very happy. But when God has promised you Isaac, keep chasing His promise. Not the lure of the world, not the lure of what's at hand. That's all I have for you here in this video. Until next time, we'll see you guys in the next Bible Bits. Goodbye, everybody.